So welcome back, everybody. This is episode 13 of the Motley crew. I'm Mike. We have Dave here, Rob, new guest, Jaya, and Dennis.
Dan dog.
Yes. Wow. So today's topic is going to be, is acting morally or being more moral, increase morality lead to happiness? Rob, you seem to be the most sagely person. Please get on the mic.
Sure. Well, acting morally, I guess we got to look at where the moral foundation comes from. Are we looking at it from a societal standpoint? Are we looking at it from a religious standpoint? Either way, wherever you get that moral foundation from, if that moral foundation or those morals that you actually follow tends to make you believe that you're going to live a better life, whether while you're here on earth you believe in karma or the afterlife, or just following societal dictations or societal progressions, then I would think that acting morally would make you happier. Because I think at the beginning of life, everybody tends to, if you look at babies and the way they come out and the way they usually act pretty selfishly. It's especially at the age of like 2, 3 and so forth, when they start to realize the world around them. They have to be taught to be a little bit more selfless. And they're taught through their experiences from their parents, but ultimately it's taught through the experiences through society. So at that point, you're told, if you do this, then mommy or daddy's going to be happy with you. If you don't do that, then mommy or daddy's not going to be happy with you. So all these experiences that we have as children kind of shape us as we're going forward in life. So it all depends on where that moral foundation lies and what it is that you consider to be moral or not. And as we've seen in today's society with COVID-19, with the coronavirus, you could take that to the whole vaccination argument, right? Some people with vaccination are saying, don't tell me what to do. It's my body. It's my life. But other people are saying, well, it's not about you. It's about everybody else that's around you. It's about society as a whole. So you have two different arguments there. One that would be arguably selfish because you're just thinking about yourself and don't tell me what to do. And then the other one is, no, you got to do it for everybody else because we got to combat this thing. There are old people all over the country and all over the world that are dying, and you must do your part as a young person to get vaccinated. So I think it all depends on your perspective on how you look at it and what you see morality as. And if you are moral, do you feel like that's ultimately going to have some sort of reward on the back end? That's ultimately going to make you happy.
But so some of the things that you brought up, is that actually morality, though, or being more moral? So just because you follow the rules of what would be deemed acceptable, does that make you more moral or just a good rule follower? Because like you also said at the very end, like what is the reward at the very end? So isn't the idea of morality is you're supposed to do the right thing or the good thing, regardless of the reward, whether there is one or not? And Dennis actually brought up on one of the earlier, before we started, he said, hey, the shopping cart test, right? Nobody really needs to put the shopping cart back where it's supposed to be. But yet, if you don't do it, it causes more problems in terms of efficiency or whatnot. If you do it, nobody really praises you either. You just, it's like, okay, well, you did it. Thank you. And that's about it. So I would say that's a pretty good, good example of your morality, where there's no benefit either which way. Now, you said the other point is with the reward. How many times have you or anybody else at the table seen instances where it's like, hey, I did the right thing and they did the wrong thing, and then because you did the right thing, you actually get hurt or punished because you did the right thing, like you speak out against somebody and then now you're the one going to jail or something like that, right? And then you sit there angry about it, and I know you're like, oh, well, sometimes you have to be a little bit more selfless and think of like the greater good. It's like, I don't know, this guy seems like he's living his life and whatnot, and you're out here in jail. And then, I mean, you can get into the details of whether or not he feels guilty that you're in there, but more oftentimes than not, it's like, oh, nah, he took the bullet for me. Whew, that was fine. It was great. So some of the stuff that you said earlier, I don't know if I completely agree, because you might be answering some of the different questions that are not really related to morality, but rather just being a good citizen within whatever community that you're in.
Yeah, and that's why I said you have to define what morality is to you. Because for some people, being a good citizen in the community that you're in is good morality. They go hand in hand. You don't necessarily have to. So even the shopping cart example, right? Mm-hmm. And that goes to the back to the whole thing. Is there really truly a selfless act? So you put the shopping cart back, but you're putting it back for a reason. You're putting it back because it'll declutter the parking lot for other people that come through to be able to park more efficiently. You're putting it back in order for the person who works there to have all these shopping carts collected in one place so they can easily perform their job. And then at the back end of that, you're saying, okay, now I've done my part to help society or this grocery store. And then from a karmic perspective, or from a perspective of karma, you could say, well, that could potentially come back because I'm doing all of these right things. Now, whether it comes back to you today, tomorrow, or 20 years from now, you don't know. So then that brings you into the issue of karma, because I don't truly believe that there really is truly a selfless act. Everything is based on consequence, reward and consequence. Some people won't do anything that's moral or for the betterment of society unless there's a consequence associated with it. You even look at laws that are in place. They're in place in order to keep everybody in check. You can't do this, you can't do that, or else there'll be some sort of consequence. So that's compressing the larger moral values of wherever that came from over time onto the rest of society, so they act in such a way that society can continue to move forward from that person's perspective, whoever made the laws of that land.
So in that case, are you saying that some of the people who may do these different things, it doesn't really matter what the rationale is, but rather just the thing gets done? Is that what you're saying? And the reason I say that is, like, you say, okay, they might be motivated by helping somebody else or making it more efficient or whatever. But there's also incidents of, like, virtue signaling, right? Like, you only do it because you see other people see you do it. But if nobody can see you do it, would you go and still do it? Uh-oh. Yeah, get in there.
Yeah, so I would say, other than the shopping cart, another example like came to my mind is, so whenever we drive on the highway or we're in the street, do we help the homeless person begging for money? And I think about that because you're in your car by yourself. No one can see you. And yet some people do it, or if you see the person in front of you, it's more of that individual decision. And I think for me, coming from a Catholic background, I have, or it is, this is like what I believe in, we have a bigger end goal on what this happiness is and what our morality will equate to later on in life or in the afterlife. So I would think about it where, are we becoming good citizens, or are we choosing to do good here in this, human world, because we have a reward later on? And you guys always bring about you guys are bringing out the topic of, or is our morality leading to more, like, going back to the original topic, right? Is the morality leading to more happiness, right? Or is that happiness really the reward that we're getting out of that, choosing to do good, right? So, are we more happy because we're choosing to do good because of the fact that, it makes us feel good? There's always going to be that reward. Like, for instance, okay, let me give $2 to this person. Might not affect him in the grander scheme of things, but it makes me feel good knowing that somebody else bigger than me is watching me. Okay, like, hopefully this is like, my token and my things to heaven, right?
Would you still do it if somebody was not watching you?
So that's the thing. There's always, like, I believe that there's always somebody watching me, right? Okay. You always have that, you're putting on, like, your good tokens to somebody else.
Goodwill tokens.
Yeah, your goodwill tokens to something else that's bigger. And even if I don't believe in it, maybe Dennis can have, like, a good point of view on this because, he is, you don't really identify as religious. He's a good example of, maybe, are you doing it because it's just innately good? Let me just help out this person because it makes me feel good, and because it is good, as opposed to there's somebody else watching you and have a goodwill token entrance to heaven.
Okay. Be good for goodness sake. Mm-hmm. Like the Christmas song.
I think what I'll say is, so for example, I always think for this specific thing, does the morality have to go with something that is already like there's rules in place, or something that there's no rules? So with the shopping cart, or when I was in elementary school, there was this picture of a cat looking at a tiger. And the quote was saying something like, it's not about what you do, it's about what you do when no one's looking. And then it shows like the little kitten as a tiger. So to me, I don't know why I always remember that, but I don't think, for me personally, there's no one watching me. But the fact that I've seen other people do it. So for example, my favorite basketball player is Jeremy Lin. When he was on the come up at the arcade, he would win all these tickets. And he had all these prizes, and he would just give it to little kids. Not because, like, he already had everything, but he would give it to the kid just because it feels good, or he's doing the right thing, because it doesn't matter if he's happy if he can't spread the happiness to anybody else. So because of that, I have done that. Like this past weekend, I gave my card. It was just like a couple credits, but there are little kids watching us have a good time. And I'm like, why wouldn't I have like them have a good time? They're younger, like they haven't experienced everything, so I might as well just do that. Now, I don't know if that's the right thing, because no one told me to do it, and I don't think there was any rules to do it. But for me, my personal happiness is to make that kid happy, because it makes him happy.
So, okay. So how about this? We always talk about like the positives of like doing these things, like services for other people. I could argue that there's a lot of people who find happiness in not doing the right thing.
Yes.
Right? So then if you're purely in pursuit of for the happiness, which, you know, this is what most of the examples are, the examples of when individuals are doing things negatively for their own happiness, like say you're betraying somebody, or you're winning at the expense of somebody else, and there is some happiness from it. I don't know if you want to call it short-term or long-term or whatever it may be, but hey, they got to the position that they're in because they did the wrong thing. How do you guys respond to that? Because you guys kept on saying, like, hey, I did this thing because it makes me happy. I can also do this negative thing, and it makes me happy.
I would say it's like depends on. I always think about the sense of guilt. Like, you know, is more happiness because you have a lower sense of guilt, meaning you have no. You know, you are motivated to so you are motivated to do good. You know, it doesn't make you feel guilty. It makes you feel good. So I'll go ahead and do it. As opposed to, okay, if I'm like maybe a villain in a story, you know, I'm going to do whatever it takes because that end goal is what's going to make me happy. No guilt. You know, it's going to make me happy no matter what the consequences is or are.
I think that the thing that we're missing here is we really need to determine first are we talking about happiness for yourself or happiness for the greater good, right? Because that's the big question in morality and in ethics, right? Is that when we talk about morality, is making a moral decision, is it for you or the greater good? And those are distinctly different, because you can make a decision for yourself that's you consider to be morally righteous, or the virtues are there that may not be great for the greater good, or you could do the opposite, right? So because morality is very subjective and happiness is very subjective, I think the real question is are the two actually linked? They may not be linked, right? Because we could do something that we consider, as Rob had said, morality really depends, right? The lens of morality is totally different from individual to individual, based on how you were raised and what you were shown, right? So you could do something that is morally right or wrong in your scope, right? It could be considered morally right or wrong by everyone else, but does that really lead to your happiness? Is your morality really causing your happiness? And I would argue that it doesn't necessarily have to. Whether or not you could do something morally upstanding 1 minute and then 2 minutes later do something that is not morally upstanding by your own matrix, and you could still be happy, or you could still be sad. Is it really contributing to that? We're talking about feelings of guilt, grief, we're talking about the greater good, we're talking about religion, we're talking about all these things. These are all things that contribute to your sense of happiness as a whole, your sense of accomplishment. Morality, I would argue, is just something that is kind of on the side and kind of overhangs over all of our decisions, right? You could do 100 moral things and one terrible thing. If that terrible thing that is unmoral is greater than all of your moral decisions, are you an unmoral person? So We see it all the time with criminals, right? You have one bad action that defines you for the rest of your life. Does that wipe out every moral decision that you've ever made prior to that? So again, I don't necessarily know if it does contribute directly to happiness.
This is bringing me back to like college ethics 101.
That is very well
So
said,
good,
David.
Dave.
That was nice.
That's awesome. Like,
Wow, we gotta
snap,
snap it up
snap.
for Dave over here. That was real nice.
You reminded me of.
Pour.
I think it's just like.
Pour out the pitcher for Rob.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Pour it out. Pour
Yeah.
one out for Dave over here.
Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
reminds me of, I think back in ethics, back a long time ago in college, we think about all these different schools of thoughts of what morality is, whether it's for the greater good or is it the selfless act that benefits somebody else, not you. Think about things that are running through my mind is always that Heinz experiment. It was, I think, Dr. Heinz, where there was a woman. Do you steal? Like, there was a woman that is sick, or his wife is sick. Does he steal the potion, or does he kill the scientist that creates, or the doctor that can treat her, or will he not treat her and somebody else, his wife will die? I don't know if you guys remember that
Ethical dilemmas.
Yes,
Yes.
ethical
Yeah.
developments.
Mhm.
Yes.
Wait, was there more to that? No, you just say
I'm
that reminds me of that story.
I'm just reminded by the story. I don't want to like delve in there because I don't think that it kind of like applies, but maybe it could apply because like it's actually like there's more to it. I'm gonna have my phone maybe on the next.
Okay.
On the next one.
So I want to expand a little bit on what Dave was saying, right? Dave was saying that, you know what, we're not really sure if the morality and happiness are linked. I think that's a general gist of what you're saying. Sometimes
right.
it is, and sometimes it's not. So what I will say is, although it may not be completely linked, you could say that if you completely forego it altogether, like, whatever morals, I'm just doing whatever I want. Okay? Do you think that would lead to a better outcome then? Because if they're not completely linked, then I don't want to say that that's what you're saying, but that would almost imply that they're independent of each other, kind of, or maybe only kind of linked.
Well, it depends. What do you consider better? What's the better outcome?
Well,
If I'm completely selfish and I act based on what I want, some of my decisions could be moral and some could not, right? Because again, it's subjective, right? So if I go and I'm gonna, because I want something, I'm just gonna do what I want, regardless of how it impacts everyone else around me, right? Well, is that really immoral? Is it? I mean, what if I'm within my moral scope, right? What if I'm like, hey, you know what? As long as I am not physically harming another individual, I'm a good person,
but
right?
by psychologically damage is all
Right?
good. It's fine.
So I'm going to do whatever I need to do at work, right? Like, for example, work. I'm going to do whatever I got to do to climb the ladder, right? I'm going to put everyone else to shame. I'm going to put everyone else's work down, right?
So isn't that exactly what it is in the United States, right? Where we prioritize, or those who grind harder, do whatever it takes to get to the top, is one of the things that is almost like glorified here.
Right.
Right? At the expense, like, oh, you're gonna feel sad about it, sucks.
You want
It
to
is
you
what
want
it
to
is. I'm climbing right now. It don't matter.
You want to take this to the next level. Let's apply it to society. Let's apply it to capitalism, right? Isn't a successful business rising to the top? What happened to all these big box stores? They put all the mom and pop stores
they
out of
crushed them.
business.
Right.
Hey, we can sell cheaper than you. You know what? You can't feed your families. That's fine. You know what? That's capitalism. Sorry, we're making money. You're not. Is that really moral? Well, maybe,
isn't that the
maybe
gripe
not.
about it? Isn't that the gripe about capitalism? Is that there's no place for morality in capitalism?
Right. That's absolutely true. But my point is that it's creating happiness for those individuals, right?
Wow.
Like to
so
those who
so
benefit.
there you
You're on
go.
fire
So,
today,
so
David.
again, completely independent,
Yo.
right? It's completely independent, in my opinion, in certain circumstances. And yeah, they're linked. Like going back to your original question, what is better? What is the better outcome? It just depends person to person. I'm reminded, we were talking about it in the clinic the other day, Keanu Reeves, right? There's a lot of stories about him just being like a really nice guy, right? And he purposely, he tells his PR team not to release any of the information to anyone. So the only way these stories get out are through like Reddit or through individuals that actually retell these stories. Like this guy buys, shout out Keanu, by the way, if you're watching. He goes and he buys the entire production crew lunch just because every single day. He doesn't ask for anything in return. He doesn't tell anyone. He doesn't virtue signal, right? He'll go and he'll take pictures with people. And because he is so sensitive to all of the issues going on right now with women, he won't even touch a female that he's not associated with. If you've ever noticed that, when he takes pictures, he puts his arm around people, but won't actually touch them out of respect for their personal space. But he never talks about it. He never does anything. He likes to remain anonymous, right? So this is the type of individual, right, whose actions, he doesn't want his actions truly being seen, like we've been talking about, right? Is it possible to be unseen? Probably not, especially in the public light. But I feel like that's kind of a key here, and we touched on it earlier. If you are not being seen, how you're acting, that is the moral scope, right? That is really what you do on your own, not what you do for everyone else or with everyone else, because you're going to act how you're going to act depending on what you want.
Do you
right?
think that makes him happy? All these things that you talk about, do you think that makes him happy? Or rather, if he does the opposite, it would just make him unhappy?
He's watching, by the way, so you might want to
You know?
answer correctly.
That's right.
Because these different things, he may be led by a moral compass and stuff, and let's say that it's more strict than what we would typically see. I don't know what it is. I'm speculating, right? If he goes against his moral compass, arguably, he might become less happy because he would feel some type of guilt about it. Whereas if your parameters for what you find moral is less, there's less things that will lead you astray, right? You just have more area to go into. And so then the feeling of guilt and aversion just kind of is less, or there's just less opportunity for that to arise. So in totality, you probably could be happier if you were less moral.
Well, yeah.
if we want to look, and that's why I asked you that question, because you said, hey, he does these things nobody knows and only other people do it. So do you think he's doing that specifically to be more happy, or at least to not be unhappy?
I mean, I don't necessarily think it matters. Nobody's watching, right? Or minimal people are watching. So if you repeatedly do something and no one is watching, does it matter? If there has to be some sort of logic here where if nobody's watching and you continuously are doing something, no one's forcing you to do it. You're doing it out of your own volition, right?
But isn't the morality aspect always including somebody else? Can you be moral by yourself?
I don't necessarily know if the construct applies to you alone, but I do think that your morality or sense of morality, whether it's psychological or societally imposed, your perception of morality is defined when you're by yourself, but it is more impressed upon you when you're with others.
But
right?
your level of morality really doesn't get changed unless it is impacting somebody else, right? So some of the different activities that you do ultimately is whether or not they see you favorably, not see you favorably, or whether they even see you at all. So that's what I'm trying to get at. You're like, hey, it's kind of independent. It's like, I don't think it can be independent because your morality has to impact somebody else. Like maybe you're doing something for somebody else, or maybe you're not. You're doing something to hurt somebody else. That would be what's seen as good or bad. But if nobody is there, if you're just by yourself, there's really no morality if it's just you. Because anything you do is just what you do, because it's not affecting anybody. It's just what you do.
Right. Well, there's always going to be someone, right?
But that's the point. There's always going to be someone where your actions will affect it.
So I guess when we're now talking about morality, I think Dave brought it up, right? Morality is for acting independently for somebody else's greater good, or because
Right.
our decisions are now affecting somebody else. And I think that ultimately, I feel like we've defined what morality is now. It's because, I'm drinking this coffee, doesn't affect anybody, makes me feel good, as opposed to, let me go ahead and let me share this coffee. Now it's a moral act because I'm sharing it for somebody else's benefit, or for somebody else's, there's always going to be like that attachment to somebody else.
But there could be a potential conflict where, hey, it's not bothering anybody. Well, let's say that it is bothering Rob over here. Rob's like, yo, I can't stand the smell of this coffee right now. What do? What is the moral thing to do at this point? Because you could share with him, he can be facilitated, but Rob can be the one who is being inhibited, like, oh, I hate this smell right now.
So for me personally, I would ask Rob, if it makes you feel bad, would it be better if I put the coffee outside or if I drink it first before I come in so it doesn't bother him? That's for me. I think a very common it gets me a little frustrated, but at work the biggest example is we're the night shift for the clinic, and the people who leave before us, they always leave the place a mess, and then we have to clean it up just so that they can come back to a clean clinic. Now again, nobody's watching and nobody's telling me to clean it. I don't have to do it, but I still do it. Again, it makes me feel good, but whether they know who's cleaning it or not, it doesn't matter. And to your point and what Dave was saying, I think they can be independent, but there is, at the end of the day, going to be someone who benefits from your morality. That's just
assuming that what you did is impacts somebody else. Because you can do something really good in your room. Nobody is affected. Nobody knows it even happened. Arguably, nobody cares. Then is it even moral then? Can that be considered a moral act? Like, oh, I'm over here repenting. I feel so sad. I'm just trying to get forgiveness for myself. I sit there and meditate for a little bit. Nobody knows you're doing that. And then now, it's fine. It's only until you go and approach the other person that you might have been sad about, or the situation you've been sad about. It's like, oh, you know what, Mike, your demeanor seems a little bit better today. I'm happy to be around you now. So the activity itself is only considered moral after you have interactions with another party of some sort.
Yeah, but I would, the only counter argument to that, I think you're completely right, absolutely. But my only counter argument would be, what individual acts morally by themselves and does not act morally with others, right? So if you're going to bring up that example, right, you're gonna do all of these upstanding things, right, and then you're gonna act completely different with people around, whether it's moral and immoral or immoral and then moral. There's usually some pattern, unless you're just a complete sociopath.
There's
right?
a lot of people who do that.
Well,
that's the same thing as when we talk about, like, hey, the way you act around your friends is different than the way you act around your wife or your kids or whatever. People put on different faces all the time. Sometimes you may be more moral, and so other times when you hang out with your boys, you might be less moral.
but is that morality?
That's what I was going to say. Are those actions morale? I don't know. That's a stretch, I think.
I would agree. I don't think that's morality at all. I think.
Why couldn't it be morality?
Well, I think morality has to do with like a decision more than like just actions.
Yeah, so even still, the decisions that are impacting other people, right? Ultimately, any action that you take will be seen as either positive or negative in some sort, or you could call it neutral too. So, yeah, let's say that you are an upstanding character when you're with your kids, but then when you're with your friends, you're a little bit more relaxed. Then the moral compass stands out, like, hey, maybe some of the things that you do when you're with your friends may be seen as more negative. Like, hey, we're causing more of a ruckus out here, just being a little bit louder, a little bit rowdier than when with your kids and you're just a little bit quieter. And then ultimately, this depends on the person viewing you, right? Are they getting affected by your actions? When you're with your friends, you're probably more lenient, or you're more readily accepting of the consequences of somebody coming up to you and saying, hey, you're too loud, compared to if you're with your kids and your kids, oh, I got to set a good example for them, type of thing. So then, is it moral? I don't know. Maybe you sacrifice your morality at that point just a little bit, so that is worthwhile within that social setting, within the relationships that you're trying to foster or continue or whatever it may be. That's kind of the angle that I'm getting at for the morality standpoint, when you're a different person to different people. It's like, can you be the same person to everybody? It's like, yes, but also no.
Well, does morality apply? What's the scope of morality, right? I mean, if I put down a pizza here, right, and we all take a slice, right, and there's 2 slices left, is the individual that takes a slice so everyone else can't have one, is that immoral? No, I mean,
this is a chicken wing paradox. You
yeah,
can't say that like that. No.
Throwing it back to RB.
Because it depends on the relationship then.
Well, it probably also depends on the setting or the environment that you're in as well. So like you said, you morph yourself into whatever situation that you're in. So I think it all depends on how strong of a person are you. If you have this moral foundation, this moral compass, it shouldn't really affect you as to what environment you're in, whether you're with your kids or whether you're with your friends. So if you're with your kids and you're trying to set that moral example, and then you're this high person of morality and so forth, and then I'm out with you guys and you guys do something that I don't see as morally just, or you guys are about to make a decision that's wrong, that goes against my moral standards, that's where it takes that person to stand up in that particular situation and say, no, guys, we're not doing that. No, guys, we shouldn't do this. Somebody's got to be the voice of reason. So that's when your leadership skills come in. You shouldn't be so easily influenced or swayed by the wind, like we said before, with other situations that come about. Your moral foundation is what it is, no matter what situation you're into. And that takes a level of maturity that kind of comes over time. As you're a teenager and so forth, you're influenced by different things. Your parents are trying to tell you, live this just moral life. Your friends are trying to tell you, no, let's do this. Let's stay out all night and party and smoke and drink and so forth. Eventually, you should be able to come to some moral foundation and say, who am I? Am I the guy who's the capitalist who wants to build this huge Walmart and then take all these small businesses out of business? Or am I the guy that's going to come in and then try to help to develop the small businesses and have everybody come in and everybody has a piece of the pie, the way that capitalism is supposedly supposed to work? So at a certain point, you have to make a decision within yourself. Who am I? And then how does that affect the people that are around me, and how do I influence the people around me to make better moral choices and better judgments over time?
Well, wouldn't you say every interaction you have is an opportunity for you to retest your morality?
Absolutely.
Right. So
absolutely.
So sometimes you're like, hey, it takes a bigger person to stand up to say this is not for me. Or you could say that, you know what, maybe some of the rules that I'm upholding right now is too strict to the point where it impacts you on your own and how you move about in life, right? And so some of the things that you might think about is in school, right? You think about the super rule follower, and then you think about the person who's kind of a rule follower and the person who doesn't follow any rules. Mm-hmm. Each person has their own distinct, and then has their own distinct morality set. But then when confronted with different situations, how do you think, there's going to be schools of thought where you should go like who would side with you? It's like, oh, should I be allowed to be more free? Should I be more like super strict to the book, and then or the in between? And then in between it kind of gets gray because it's like, oh, how come this is okay and this is not okay, and right. and that. So is it also a problem? No, I wouldn't say a problem, but rather, why do you think sometimes it's seen unfavorably when you see somebody who is considered more moral or more strict with their morals, and then they kind of decrease how strict they are with it comparatively to when somebody who is seen as immoral or not positive, and then they go more towards the positive side? So normally it's like, hey, if you're like robbing somebody or whatever it may be, and then you straighten up, you sober up, and you're starting to do the right thing, that's seen more favorably than somebody who's super strict by the rules, who's always doing the right thing, and then they kind of come down a little bit, and you're like, oh man, I thought you were this type of character. It seems so, it's just not seen as favorably. So, and then that kind of leads back to the initial question, which is, is being more moral, being more happy, right? Because after you hit a certain level of strictness or morality, anytime you move a step back, you almost have to maintain that level of morality just for continuity between you and your the relationships that you have with other people, or even people that you don't have with, just people out in the public, how people see you.
I think what I like about what Rob mentioned is that I feel like there's another component to morality, where morality is how strong your sense of self is, right? And like for instance, if I see somebody getting bullied, will I stand up? Is that my morality? Like bullying is wrong. Is me standing up to that person my action in order, like this is my morality, like being like voiced out loud, right? Or is my morality being voiced very smallly in the silent and quiet actions that we're doing, such as, let me give $5, $10 and feed the poor, right? So I would say that no matter how big or how small our actions are, right, it's morality is still a part of that sense of self of somebody. So are they innately good? Are they innately bad? But in the end, right, what will make me happy, so what will determine my happiness is if I am much more of my sense of self, like much more that my actions are more of who I am as a person, as opposed to me doing actions that are not myself. So
I had a thought of you brought up something that I just thought about. So you guys ever seen those videos where it's at like high school or something and some kids getting bullied? But specifically in this video, it was a girl who was bullying some guy. And bullying some guy, the guy can't take it no more, strikes back in the sense of like for self-defense. And immediately after he does that, we got a bunch of like 5-6 guys coming over, white knighting coming on, and saying like, hey, you shouldn't be hitting a girl, this or that. When all the actions beforehand is like, hey, this person is in the wrong for facilitating bullying. So how do you feel about a video like that where you say, hey, bullying is wrong? So then by that rule, or not by that rule, but bullying in general is bad. Male, female, male, male, female, female, whatever. But then because all the other individuals have some, maybe a moral justice of feeling like, oh, I got to defend the female against a guy, even though he's the one getting bullied. Do you feel that that's somewhat misguided then?
yes.
So
100%.
is it ever, okay, so then is it justified for him to strike back? Because I can tell you right now that as soon as that video goes out, it's like, oh yeah, those guys did the right thing. Whereas there's going to be a party of individuals who will go and say, oh, the guy was just defending himself and it was fine.
I would say, one, it is never okay to hit anybody. So
Regardless.
So
Okay.
even if it's for self-defense, so this is like now my moral. Secondly, it's also not right to be making fun of somebody. So that girl is also wrong for bullying that guy, because bullying is, physical, mental. So in this case, we have to identify as like, is what he did is what he did an attack versus is what he did a self-defense? Because you can defend yourself differently. You don't have to hit somebody in order to defend yourself. And versus and also the girl didn't have to bother him and bully him, right? In order to elicit some sort of violent act like that, which is hitting her back. So
Yeah, this circles back to Rob's comment about sense of self. To me, when you're growing up, you don't have a good sense of self, and I don't know if there's a requisite age. Maybe you just have to achieve sage status, as Rob has. But once you could do that. You could do that as at 20 or whatever. But regardless of that, I feel like when you have your sense of self, you understand that it's only harmful if you allow it to be harmful, right? So if you're that individual and somebody comes up to you and just starts saying things to you that maybe they're putting you down, you know who you are, you know what you're about, and you walk away. Violence is never okay. We've established that.
That's what I'm saying though. Is it okay for somebody to just impose their will on you? Just because you have your moral stance, I will not hit back no matter. I have a Zen-like presence. I am just going to just shrug this off. That's pretty much what you're saying right now. She's just gonna beat me up. Whatever. It's not even that. Let's say it wasn't even her. Let's say he's gonna just beat me up. I'm just gonna be fine with it.
If you have a good sense of self, does it matter? They could say whatever they want.
There's physical damage being done and psychological.
Is there?
Good sense of self and sense of purpose as to why you would actually do that, because you actually have to have a reason, because at that point it's infuriating. Somebody's hitting you and so forth, so you're just going to sit there in that Zen mode and say, I'm just going to take this. So I think ultimately you have to say, well, why am I going to take this? Like Jay alluded to, maybe it's a higher good, it's a higher deity that's looking down on you, and you trust in that higher deity to get you through that particular situation. So your specific example took me back to the civil rights movement and the protests that they had in front of the restaurants or inside the restaurants, where a whole bunch of black people went into the restaurant, sat there in a whites only restaurant and asked to be served. And they said, we're not getting up until we're served. And this was a Martin Luther King nonviolence type
Mm-hmm.
of protest. So all the white people came and they were hitting them, throwing food at them, punching them,
trying
and
to
all that.
instigate some type of
Instigate
response.
something. And
Yeah.
their moral foundation or their ultimate purpose was to integrate these restaurants because it wasn't right. So they just sat there and they just took it the entire time. So if you could find that strength within yourself, whether you're doing something for the greater good of society like they were, or you're just saying, okay, well, my creator or my religion says I shouldn't fight back. There should never be any instances of violence no matter what. Then if you have that purpose within you and that moral foundation, you shouldn't budge.
So then what do you think about situations like where it's like Karens or something, right? Like, hey, you come out to the house and somebody goes to, or somebody's commenting on Dave's house. Like, hey, Dave, I really don't like the way that you're putting your fence on your front yard right now. It really bothers me. It's an eyesore to the community. That's what she thinks. And I'm going to report to the HOA that you are being bothersome as hell right now. And then you stand there and said, no, sir, or no, ma'am, I will not be doing that because I like this. And so do all the other neighbors like this too. So at one point, she does have a point saying like, hey, maybe it does bother her, and maybe it is against, or maybe it's not against the rules. It's a gray area behind it. You said there, Rob, that like, hey, technically they're allowed, but then they're trying to instigate some response. So let's say in this case, the Karen's trying to instigate some response from you, and then you have your own sense of worth, and you're like, no, I will stand up for myself. Do you think those scenarios are synonymous? Like, do you think you're in the right to be doing that, or is she in the right in doing that? Now, of course, I bias this by saying Karen, because when I think of a Karen, it's typically used as a negative connotation. But let's just say a concerned individual who is
Concerned individual.
Concerned with a capital K.
Yeah, and wants to, voice her opinions to you.
Well, everyone's entitled to their opinion, regardless of what it is. If it's hurtful or closed-minded, they can still have that opinion. The question is what is the opinion, right? So it can be
for the greater good.
Well,
Arguably, it could be for the greater good, because that's what Rob just talked about. Like, hey, we're going to sit here for the greater good of civil rights.
Right, and I'm kind of backing out of the morals for a second in terms of anyone is entitled in this country to express themselves as long as they're not physically harming others, right? You can have an opinion. In theory. If you have a good sense of self and someone is expressing opinions to you that you don't agree with or that you morally disagree with, you have to, I kind of side with Rob here, you have to have a good enough sense of self to say, hey, you know what? It is what it is. I'm sorry you feel that way. Okay. That's it. You have a good enough sense of self to walk away, right? And that's not you're considering the other individual's point, right? You're hearing them, you're acknowledging them, right? So you're allowing them to be heard. However, you're not going to feel any sort of way about it. You're going to process the information, take it in, independent of any sort of feelings, and you're going to move on because you have a good enough sense of self to understand that, hey, I may disagree with this. However, it's not whether or not I agree, right? It's how I process that and how I feel about it. You can feel a certain way, but if you act on that feeling, that's when it becomes either positive or negative, right? You have to have the Zen-like focus and Zen-like, to sit there and say, hey, this may infuriate me, but you know what? It's only infuriating me because I'm allowing it to infuriate me, right? I don't have a good enough sense of self, right? Where I'm going to allow all these outside variables to kind of contribute and it's going to infuriate me. And then I'm going to act in a manner that may not be in line with my moral compass, right? So in all of these Karen, quote unquote, Karen situations, more often than not, they play themselves out in favor of the individual that is being that is the target of the Karen, because most of the time, Karen, I don't really like that term. That is, they play out in favor of the individual that is being targeted, because if they have a good enough sense of self, they're going to continue on what they're doing. They're not going to let it bother them. And then the individual who has the audacity to target the other individual usually ends up paying the price, whether it's socially, financially, criminally, because they don't have a good enough sense of self. They're caving into what society has imposed on them, whether it's right or wrong.
So how many times prior to the videos would you say that some of the Karens have won because there isn't the evidence? where they'll say these different things, and then it's like, oh, I'm gonna go to HOA, and now you do have to change it, regardless of your Zen-like presence. It doesn't matter, because she did not adhere to her feelings, her Zen. She was able to succeed in her efforts.
That's fine. Does offense really contribute to my happiness? Probably not.
Well, in
It's
this
just offense.
example, yeah, in this example, sure. But what if it was like your dog or something? And it's like, oh, because of her actions, now your dog has to be put down or muffled or whatever.
Whoa.
That was kind of like Stan's situation,
Whoa.
right?
Now we're
That was
getting-
kind of Stan's situation with his dog biting something, or I think it was.
Yeah, that's what the situation was.
Yeah. So, I don't know.
What was the situation? For those of us who don't know in the audience,
Yeah, that's.
and Keanu Reeves.
I honestly don't remember, but Rob, do you remember the situation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just wrap it up really quickly. One of his neighbor's daughters were over at his friend's at their house, and then Stan was in the bathroom, and then the neighbor rang the doorbell. So Stan is usually the one that answers the door, but the neighbor's daughter actually answered the door, just opened it up.
Mm-hmm.
The neighbor walked in, and the dog didn't recognize the neighbor, and the dog bit the neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
So then the neighbor required stitches and all that, and then they went to court saying the dog was violent, and then they ultimately got a muzzle order for Stan's dog. So every time Stan walks the dog now, it's mandated that they have to put the muzzle on the dog because the dog was deemed violent at that point.
I
So-
don't know. I don't know if Stan got some Zen. I mean, he's a Zen guy, but I mean, that's pretty infuriating, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
We should probably let him defend himself.
Of course,
Yeah.
of
Yes.
course. I'm just
Agreed.
speculating. I'm just thinking of a scenario that came up in my mind and whatnot.
But I do think just in totality here, I think that sense of self was critical. The presence of other individuals was critical. If we had to take some big takeaway points here,
Yeah.
and I think that morality is fluid. I think those were kind of the three big ideas. If you would agree with that.
So what's the main answer then? If you were to, in totality, with those 3 points, more morality, more happiness? Question mark.
Oh, well,
Big
I'm
question mark.
yeah, big question mark.
I know we spend a lot of time talking about
as
it.
usual. I'm
And
gonna
then as
land in
usual,
the
we hit it
gray.
with the PT of it depends.
I'm the gray area
It
guy.
depends.
I'm gonna stay in the gray area, and I'm gonna say it depends. Maybe not. What do you guys think?
I would say, I think we all agreed, morality is always going to be determined upon if you are affecting somebody, right?
Right.
That it's for the greater good. The morality for the individual, you need to have a strong sense of self. Yeah, I think those are my 2 points that I've
Okay.
learned. I
Little
learned
takeaway
here.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it definitely depends in the gray area, but I think I'm leaning towards being happy, just for myself.
So for him, more moral, more happy.
Yeah.
For you.
Whether it impacts me negatively or not, I think the greater good is better. That's just how I was raised. But there's definitely a lot of gray area, but I lean towards more morality, more happiness.
And Rob.
I don't know about Rob.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, more morality, more happiness, no doubt, 100%. But I think Dave made a great point earlier about people who aren't moral, but they're still happy. But at the same time, we don't really know who's happy or who's not. I think that's all dependent on perspective.
Of course.
Glass half empty, glass
usual.
half full.
That's our
Right?
trigger words out
Oh,
here. Perspective.
man.
Where's
So-
Stan? We got to chime
Mike-
that in real quick.
Mike's
So you look
eye
at-
is twitching.
You look at people with money, right? Money, happiness, and all that kind of stuff. But now we're starting to find out that money doesn't necessarily buy you happiness. People can have all the money in the world, and then they still want more money than what they could spend in any given lifetime, and they're still up to shiesty deals and so forth, stepping on other
deals. Yeah.
stepping on other people in order to make even more money, in order to make them happy. Arguably, very, very immoral things that they do with their businesses, how they conduct themselves, but ultimately, they think that's going to get them to that ultimate level of happiness. Whether they ever get there or not, I have no idea. Is the person who has millions of dollars and trample along a lot of people to get there, are they happy? Happiness is all internal. They can seem happy outwardly, but inwardly they might be dying. Same person, that's same thing with somebody who is very, very morally just all the time. They seem happy on the outside, but inside, stuff might just be eating them up. Their traumas might just be eating them up. So you just don't know. For me personally, yes, I can say the more moral I am, the happier that I'm going to feel. Can I say that's a blanket statement for everybody? I think as Dave gave in his brilliant example when he first started talking.
Brilliant today.
Yeah.
He was on
Yeah,
firing
yeah.
all cylinders today. It must have been that good long break that he just was able to pick some stuff up today.
You can't say
Yeah.
that that's the truth for everybody. It's very individual.
All right. Well, I want to add on to you said having money does not necessarily make you happy. Agreed. But not having money definitely makes you unhappy. That is for sure. Me not having enough money makes me unhappy.
You,
You.
definitely.
All right.
But that's
You.
not everybody.
So
That's not everybody.
the answer there is, for me, it depends. That is what it is. Because I've had many instances where I feel that I'm doing the just thing, and then I feel happy about it. There's many instances where I've done the unjust thing, and I've profited from the unjust thing, and I feel happy about it. Not a shred of guilt afterwards. Now, maybe I'm just built different or whatever, but that's how I feel. I think it's just kind of, it depends, because more morality oftentimes, for me, makes me less happy, because sometimes it's like rules where I try to follow it, or if I do follow it, it makes me more annoyed, and then I think back and a little bit of introspection, and it makes me even more annoyed when I think back on it. Maybe I need to think for longer. I don't know.
Well,
According to you guys, it's I don't know. This
I
is
think
better.
for you, because you're so analytical, you would have to have a really good reason as to why you're performing that moral act in order for it to make you happy.
Yes.
It can't just be this existentialist thing that
It would be more of what you said, right? A cause and effect, like whether it be a reward, some consequence of some sort.
Right.
Preferably positive or less negative.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
And then ultimately, like I said before at the very beginning, that I think all of us, we always have to fight our selfishness, because we always want individually ourselves to do well, whether that be on the outside financially and so forth, or on the inside mentally. We're always looking out for number one initially. And then once number one is okay, once the self is okay, then you can start looking outwardly to say, well, how can I create a better situation for others? If that's even the stretch that you want to make. And I think that's always that pursuit of happiness, right? How do we gain that happiness as we're always pursuing it every single day when we wake up? One day is going to be different from the next. Nobody just wakes up happy day after day after day after day after day, right? You have to find what it is that makes you happy.
I'm happy right now. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've got to find what it is that balance is that's going to make you happy, but then what makes others happy at the same time. Because you don't want to give, because then we've heard people say, well, that's exhausting to that person. And then that person doesn't have that internal happiness. That person that just gives all the time. You've got to find it within yourself first, and then you could turn around.
The balance.
And then turn around and then try to give it to other people.
Good, Rob. Always saging it up at
Wow.
the very end.
Wow.
You gotta steal your thunder. No, I couldn't steal your thunder
Wow.
today. Not you today, Dave. All right. Well, I think I'm pretty flushed out on this topic. Anybody
Yes.
have anything else to add to this? All right. So we're good. So that's going to be the episode 13 Motley Crew. I'm Mike. We got Dave, Rob, Jaya, and Dennis.
Den dog.
All right. See you guys in the next episode.
Bye.
Right.
Bye.